delighted to be joined by the human rights lawyer, David Haigh. David, thank you for joining me. Do you agree with me that language is fundamentally important and cannot be disassociated from politics?
Absolutely, I do, Jacob. And I think, there's a lot of your viewers may or may not know the Magistrates' Court is incredibly important in the administration of justice. They look after maybe 90% of criminal cases as well as family cases. So this is very important. It's not an unimportant issue. And of course, we already, I think we all want a judiciary that doesn't discriminate against people on the grounds of things like disability or sex or age. And of course, we already have legislation that helps protect that. Now, what we've seen obviously is now that the Magistrates Association trying to bring in new language, which you've described very, very well. And from a human rights perspective, like I said, it's very admirable that we stop discrimination in courts, and there may well be some, but do we want to go that extra level and put another burden on already overworked magistrates' courts, worrying about whether or not to call someone a chairperson or a chairwoman?
Because I think what you say is so important, that we all want to have absolute confidence that our courts are impartial and that they don't discriminate against anybody, because as soon as you start discriminating, you may find the innocent guilty, and that's the worst aspect of any form of legal system, if the innocent are found guilty. And so what worries me is that this politicises it and brings in something that has become an ideology of the left into something that ought to be apolitical.
Well, absolutely, and I think that's the key. We already have legislation, as you well know, that actually talks about equality and diversity and sets laws which apply to courts as well. For instance, covers things like mental health and the need to make reasonable adjustment on the judiciary in cases of mental health and other disabilities. So with the Magistrates Association effectively putting in place additional language and additional requirements that's over and above what's already there in legislation, I think it's unnecessary, it's confusing, and as you say, it's political.
And it's certainly confusing because even the Magistrates Association has had to try and clarify what it meant, because it's pretending that this isn't for magistrates, it's just for volunteers within the Magistrates Association. But that seems to me a bit of an ex post facto explanation.
Well, absolutely. I mean, why then issue that? Why then issue that? Why make it public? The Magistrates Association is to look after effectively magistrates as well as you mentioned, their supporters. Now, if that was the case at the time, why not make that clear? And as people have said, and why we're having this discussion, it is confusing. And like I said, the magistrates are incredibly important in the administration of justice. They're already, I would imagine, very much overworked and somewhat under-resourced in terms of the actual court buildings and the administration of it. So I think there's a lot more focus that should be have on the actual administration of the justice and resources we can give to the magistrates than this.
And isn't it fair to say that this is an unusual mistake by the Magistrates Association, which is broadly a good organisation to try and help magistrates do their job better, and that's a valuable role and you want an organisation that does something like that?
I think it's a very valuable role, and the magistrates are something I think as we as Brits can be very proud of. Particularly when we look at gone are the days when you see a 70-odd-year-old white male as a magistrate. You have a very diverse set of magistrates now across the country, and that's something that we can be very, very proud of. There are other areas in the judiciary that needs to be addressed, and perhaps it's obviously not the job of the Magistrates Association, but we should be focusing on areas in the judiciary that are not representative of the country, whereas I think certainly the magistrates are.
And the magistrates have evolved to become more representative of the country as a whole over the last 20 or 30 years. It didn't happen overnight, but it evolved. And this is perhaps my key point, that language should evolve rather than being changed by edict.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, as the country, the makeup of the country and things have changed in laws, and the magistrates have slowly evolved. Now, from when I trained as a solicitor some time ago to now, there's been a lot of changes. And like I said, you go and see magistrates now up and down the country, and they are no longer 60 or 70-year-old white men. You have a good representation of all sorts of people that make up Britain, and that's, like I said, something to be proud of. But that, as you say, has evolved over time. It wasn't a written note or a memorandum from one association to change overnight.
And what importance would you attach to the Magistrates Association advocating for diversity and inclusion as a general rule rather than in this specific document?
I think as a general rule, it's you know, it's something positive, but it's, you know, they should apply the law as it exists and not try and go beyond that. We already have, as I mentioned, we already have the Equality Act and other legislation that covers discrimination and how to address people, etc. So let's stick to the laws rather than go over and above that until those laws are changed. Now, if the laws are changed, then let's follow them, but let's not go beyond that. And I think it causes confusion for everyone when you do that.
Well, thank you very much, David. The Magistrate Association has issued a statement, and it said, "Our style guide is a resource that we, like many other organisations, have available to our staff and volunteers to ensure consistent use of the English language. It would be for the Judicial Office and not us, as has been erroneously suggested in the media, to issue formal guidance to magistrates on the topic." Well, thank you to the Magistrate Association for that. We did ask them to put forward a spokesman, but they declined.